folks. Well, welcome to an evening of short stories with Good King Hal. I'm Good King Hal, and these are the short stories. I've got 3 short stories for you. In the original advert, I did say I was going to be doing Ray Bradbury, Saki, and Spike Milligan, but at the very last minute, I suddenly changed my mind, and instead of Spike Milligan short story, because I couldn't find one I was happy with, I've gone for a short story by Peter Tinniswood, another very popular comedy writer, and I absolutely adore his work, and I hope you do too. So we're going to kick off this evening. The first story is by the American science fiction writer Ray Bradbury. Now, Ray Bradbury is probably the most eminent American science fiction writer, bar Isaac Asimov, of the 20th century. But he was always sort of rather lumped under the idea of all these stories were going to be like about rockets and alien planets and things. It was a bit more.
What you're talking about?
I don't know what you're talking about. Hello, Mother.
Sorry.
Sorry, I'll mute you. We're recording already. Thank you. And Ray Bradbury, he was born in USA in 1920. He started his professional writing career in 1938 and continued until he died in 2012. His probably his most famous work is a novel called Fahrenheit 451. But he also wrote the very famous and well-remembered Martian Chronicles, which was a series of short stories held together with an overarching general storyline. The story I'm going to do for him tonight is from the Martian Chronicles. It's called There Will Come Soft Rains, and it's I discovered it purely by chance when I was doing my O-levels, because when I was doing my O-levels many centuries ago, our 3 texts we were given for that particular year was 1984 by George Orwell. We were also given Macbeth by William Shakespeare, but we were also given an anthology of short stories. And one of the short stories in this book that we were given was There Will Come Soft Rains by Ray Bradbury. And I never really read anything quite like it before at that age. And it's a story that's stuck with me ever since. It's not the jolliest of stories, but it's a very clever story. And so we shall begin with the first story of the evening, which is There Will Come Soft Rains by Ray Bradbury. For this, I will occasionally have to adopt an American accent, and I do apologise in advance for anybody who's very good at American accents. But we'll see how it goes. So There Will Come Soft Rains by Ray Bradbury. In the living room, the voice clock sang, tick-tock, 7 o'clock, time to get up, 7 o'clock, as if it were afraid nobody would. The morning house lay empty. The clock ticked on, repeating and repeating its sounds into the emptiness. 7-9, breakfast time, 7-9. In the kitchen, the breakfast stove gave a hissing sigh and ejected from its warm interior 8 pieces of perfectly browned toast, 8 eggs sunny side up, 16 slices of bacon, 2 coffees, and 2 cool glasses of milk. Today is August 4, 2026, said a second voice from the kitchen ceiling, in the city of Allendale, California. He repeated the date 3 times for memory's sake. Today is Mr. Featherston's birthday. Today is the anniversary of Toleda's marriage. Insurance is payable, as are the water, gas, and light bills. Somewhere in the walls, relays clicked, memory tapes glided under electric eyes. 8-1, tick-tock, 8-1 o'clock, after school, after work, run, 8-1. But no door slammed, no carpets took the soft tread of rubber heels. It was raining outside. The weather box on the front door sang quietly, rain, rain, go away, rubber raincoats for today. And the rain tapped on the empty house, echoing. Outside, the garage chimed and lifted its doors to reveal the waiting car. After a long wait, the door swung down again. At 8:30, the eggs were shriveled, the toast was like stone. An aluminium wedge scraped them down a metal throat, which digested and flushed them away to the distant sea. The dirty dishes were dropped into a hot water washer and emerged twinkling and dry. 9:15, sang the clock, time to clean. Out of warrens in the wall, tiny robot mice darted. The rooms were a crawl with the small cleaning animals, all rubber and metal. They thudded against chairs, whirling their moustached runners, kneading the rug nap, sucking gently at hidden dust. Then, like mysterious invaders, they popped into their burrows. Their pink electric eyes faded. The house was clean. 10 o'clock. The sun came out from behind the rain. The house stood alone in a city of rubble and ashes. This was the one house left standing. At night, the ruined city gave off a radioactive glow which could be seen for miles. 10:15, the garden sprinklers whirled up in golden founts, filling the soft morning air with scatterings of brightness. The water pelted window panes running down the charred west side, where the house had been burned evenly free of its white paint. The entire west face of the house was black, save for 5 places. Here the silhouette in the paint of a man mowing a lawn. Here, as in a photograph, a woman bent to pick flowers. And still farther over, their images burnt on wood in one titanic instant, a small boy, hands flung into the air. Higher up, the image of a thrown ball, and opposite him a girl, hand raised to catch a ball which would never come down. The 5 spots of paint, the man, the woman, the children, the ball, remained. The rest was a thin charcoal layer. The gentle sprinkler rain filled the garden with falling light. Until this day, how well the house had kept its peace. How carefully had it inquired, "Who goes there? What's the password?" And getting no answer from the only foxes and whining cats, it had shut up its windows and drawn shades in an old maidenly preoccupation with self-protection, which bordered on a mechanical paranoia. It quivered at each sound, the house did. If a sparrow brushed a window, the shade would snap up. The bird, startled, flew off. No, not even a bird must touch the house. The house was an altar with 10,000 attendants, big, small, servicing, attending, inquires, but the gods had gone away and the ritual of the religion continued senselessly and uselessly. 12 noon, a dog whined, shivering on the front porch. The front door recognized the dog voice and opened. The dog, once large and fleshy, but now gone to bone and covered with sores, moved in and through the house, tracking mud. Behind it whirred angry mice, angry at having to pick up mud, angry at inconvenience. For not a leaf fragment blew under the door, but the wall panels slipped down and the copper scrap rats flashed swiftly out. The offending dust, hair or paper, seized in miniature steel drawers, was raced back to the burrows, there down tubes which fed into the cellar. It was dropped like evil Baal into a dark corner. The dog ran upstairs, hysterically yelping at each door, at last realizing, as the house realized, that only silence was here. It sniffed the air and scratched the kitchen door. Behind the door, the stove was making pancakes which filled the house with a rich odor and the scent of maple syrup. The dog frothed at the mouth, lying at the door, sniffing, its eyes turned to fire. It ran wildly in circles, biting its tail, spun in a frenzy, and died. It lay in the parlour for an hour. 2 o'clock, sang a voice. Delicately sensing decay at last, the regiments of mice hummed out as softly as blown grey leaves in an electrical wind. 2:15, the dog was gone. In the cellar, the incinerator glowed suddenly and a whirl of sparks leapt up the chimney. 2:35, bridge tables sprouted from patio walls. Playing cards fluttered onto pads in a shower of pips. Martinis manifested on an oaken bench with egg salad sandwiches. Music played, but the tables were silent and the cards untouched. At 4 o'clock, the tables folded like great butterflies back through the panelled walls. 4:30, the nursery walls glowed. Animals took shape: yellow giraffes, blue lions, pink antelopes, lilac panthers, cavorting in crystal substance. The walls were glass. They looked out upon colour and fantasy. Hidden films clocked through the well-oiled sprockets and the walls lived. The nursery floor was woven to resemble a crisp cereal meadow. Over this ran aluminium roaches and iron crickets, and in the hot still air, butterflies of delicate red tissue wavered among the sharp aroma of animal spores. There was a sound like a great matted yellow hive of beads within a dark bellows, the lazy bumble of a purring lion. And there was the patter of okapi feet and the murmur of a fresh jungle rain, like other hoofs falling upon the summer-starched grass. Now the walls dissolved into distances of parched weed, mile on mile and warm endless sky. The animals drew away into thorn breaks and waterholes. It was the children's hour. 5 o'clock. The bath filled with clean hot water. 6, 7, 8 o'clock. The dinner dishes manipulated like magic tricks, and in the study a click. In the metal stand opposite the hearth, where a fire now blazed up warmly, a cigar popped out, half an inch of soft grey ash on it, smoking and waiting. 9 o'clock. The beds warmed their hidden circuits, for nights were cool here. 9:05. A voice spoke from the study ceiling. "Mrs. McClellan, which poem would you like this evening?" The house was silent. The voice said at last, "Since you express no preference, I shall select a poem at random." Quiet music rose to back the voice. "Sarah Teasdale, as I recall, your favourite." There will come soft rains and the smell of the ground, and swallows circling with their shimmering sound, and frogs in the pools singing at night, and wild plum trees in tremulous white. Robins will wear their feathery fire, whistling their whims on a low fence wire. And not one will know of the war, not one will care at last when it is done. No one would mind neither bird nor tree if mankind perished utterly, and spring herself, when she woke at dawn, would scarcely know that we were gone. The fire burned on the stone hearth, and the cigar fell away into a mound of quiet ash on its tray. The empty chairs faced each other between the silent walls, and the music played. At 10 o'clock, the house began to die. The wind blew. A falling tree bough crashed through the kitchen window. Cleaning solvent bottled shattered over the stove. The room was ablaze in an instant. "Fire!" screamed a voice. The house lights flashed. Water pumps shot water from the ceilings, but the solvent spread on the linoleum, licking, eating under the kitchen door, while the voices took up in chorus, "Fire! Fire! Fire!" The house tried to save itself. Doors sprang tightly shut, but the windows were broken by the heat, and the wind blew and sucked upon the fire. The house gave ground as the fire, in 10 billion angry sparks, moved with flaming ease from room to room, and then up the stairs, while scurrying water rats squeaked from the walls, pistoled their water, and ran for more. But the wall sprays let down showers of mechanical rain. But too late. Somewhere, sighing, a pump shrugged to a stop. The quenching rain ceased. The reserve water supply, which had filled the baths and washed the dishes for many quiet days, was gone. The fire crackled up the stairs. It fed upon Picassos and Matisses in the upper halls, like delicacies baking off the oily flesh, tenderly crisping the canvases into black shavings. Now the fire lay in beds, stood in windows, changed the colours of drapes, and then reinforcements from attic trapdoors, blind robot faces, peered down with faucet mouths, gushing green chemical. The fire backed off, as even an elephant must at the sight of a dead snake. Now there were 20 snakes whipping over the floor, killing the fire with a clear, cold venom of green froth. But the fire was clever. It had sent flames outside the house, up through the attic to the pumps there. An explosion. The attic brain which directed the pumps was shattered into bronze shrapnel on the beams. The fire rushed back into every closet and fell on the clothes that hung there. The house shuddered, oak bone on bone, its bared skeleton cringing from the heat, its wire, its nerves revealed as if a surgeon had torn the skin off to let the red veins and capillaries quiver in the scalded air. "Help! Help! Fire! Run!" Heat snapped mirrors like the first brittle winter ice, and the voices wailed, "Fire! Fire! Run!" like a tragic nursery rhyme. A dozen voices, high, low, like children dying in a forest alone, and the voices fading as the wires popped their sheathings like hot chestnuts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 voices died. In the nursery, the jungle burned. Blue lions roared, purple giraffes bounded off, the panthers ran in circles, changing colour, and 10 million animals running before the fire vanished off towards a distant steaming river. 10 more voices died. In the last instant under the fire avalanche, other choruses, oblivious, could be heard announcing the time, playing music, cutting the lawn by remote control mower, or setting an umbrella frantically out and in, and then slamming and opening front doors. 1,000 things happening, like a clock shop where each clock strikes the hour insanely before or after the other. A scene of maniac confusion, yet unity. Singing, screaming, a few last cleaning mice darting bravely out to carry the horrid ashes away, and one voice, with sublime disregard for the situation, was reading poetry aloud in all the fiery study, until all the film spools burned, until all the wires withered and the circuits cracked. The fire burst the house and let it slam flat down, puffing out skirts of spark and smoke. In the kitchen, an instant before the rain of fire and timber, the stove could be seen making breakfast at a psychopathic rate. 10 dozen eggs, 6 loaves of toast, 20 dozen bacon strips, which, eaten by the fire, started the stove working again, hysterically hissing. The crash, the attic smashing into the kitchen and the parlour into the cellar, and the cellar into the sub-cellar. Deep freeze, armchair, film tape, circuits, beds, and all the skeletons thrown into a cluttered mound deep under. Smoke, and then silence. A great quantity of smoke. Dawn showed faintly in the east. Among the rooms, one wall stood alone. Within the wall, a last voice said over and over and over again, even as the sun rose to shine upon the heaped rubble and steam, "Today is August 5, 2026. Today is August 5, 2026. The end. What a jolly little story, eh, folks? But it was one of those ones, it absolutely captured me when I was about... thank you for the applause up there in the Nash household. That's very kind of you. The check is in the post. Not really. Well, if it is, it'll bounce. So, and it... from that point, I went and collected more Ray Bradbury stories, and the other one I nearly read for you this evening is one he did called A Sound of Thunder, which is a very clever one about a company that runs time safaris. You go back in time and you get to shoot a dinosaur, but what they do is they check them. They know when this dinosaur exactly is going to die, and you go back and you shoot it about an hour before it was supposed to die, so you don't change history too much. And everybody that goes there has to stay on a footpath that's raised above, because there's the butterfly effect thing that if you step off it and if you kill just one creature, it could cause this chain effect that will change the whole of history in the future. And basically in the story, a guy goes back and he panics when he sees because he's chosen to shoot a Tyrannosaurus Rex. So when he sees the T-Rex, he's terrified and he makes a run for it. He falls off the walkway and they drag him back up and they kill the dinosaur, go back to the future and find everything's changed. It's turned into a fascist state, and they check his boots and he's basically trodden on a butterfly and killed it. And that's changed the whole of the future of history. Fascinating story, but we'll come back to Ray Bradbury another time. Right, little bijou slurpet of the reading juice. Because I need it. And we come to another one of my... Thank you, another drink there. Far more sensible drinking tea or coffee or whatever there at the Nash. This is a story by a writer I did at the Halloween show last year. Saki. Last year I read one of his stories, which was Gabriel Ernest, which is... a typical sort of Saki story. It's sort of set in upper-class Edwardian family who adopt a child who, of course, then suddenly turns out to be a werewolf, as you do. And I came to Saki exactly the same way as I came to Ray Bradbury. It was through that same book from doing my O-levels. And this story, which I'm going to do for you now, was also in this anthology that we did. If you don't know Saki, he was a Scottish writer. His real name was Hector Hugh Munro. He was born in 1870 in a rather well-to-do family. And even though he was well over age when the First World War started, he enlisted, but not as a commissioned officer as he was offered. He wanted to be just one of the lads. And he went in, eventually became a sergeant, but unfortunately he was killed in action in 1916. And a lot of his work was actually lost because his sister thought it was unsuitable for a man of his standing to be a writer and destroyed a lot of his stories. Luckily, we still got a load that still exist. And he wrote a lot of his stories from the point of view of sort of upper class society in Edwardian times, but he spiced it through with this very sort of wicked wit and almost sort of gothic horror element to some of the stuff. As I said, the Gabriel Ernest story about the werewolf child is a typical example. I did another one, Shredny Vashtar, about a child who worshipped this evil killer polecat thing that sort of did his deeds. But this one's a lot nicer than that. Mostly. This is a story called Tobermory. It's not about a womble, don't worry. It's actually about a cat. It's well, you'll see as the story unfolds, and it's all set in a rather posh house down in the West Country where they're having a weekend house party, and this is what happens. Tobermory by Saki. It was a chill, rain-washed afternoon of late August day. That indefinite season when partridges are still in security or cold storage, and there's nothing to hunt unless one is bounded on the north by the Bristol Channel, in which case one may lawfully gallop after fat red stags. Lady Blemley's house party was not bounded on the north by the Bristol Channel, hence there was a full gathering of her guests round the tea table on this particular afternoon. And in spite of the blankness of the season and the triteness of the occasion, there was no trace in the company of that fatigued restlessness, which means a dread of pianola and a subdued hankering for auction bridge. The undisguised, open-mouthed attention of the entire party was fixed on the homely, negative personality of Mr. Cornelius Appin. Of all her guests, he was the one who had come to Lady Blemley with the vaguest reputation. Someone had said that he was clever. And he had got his invitation in the moderate expectation on the part of his hostess that some portion at least of his cleverness would be contributed to the general entertainment. Until tea time that day, she had been unable to discover in what direction, if any, his cleverness lay. He was neither a wit nor a croquet champion. a hypnotic force nor a begetter of amateur theatricals. Neither did his exterior suggest the sort of man in whom women are willing to pardon a generous measure of mental deficiency. He had subsided into mere Mr. Appin, and Cornelius seemed a piece of transparent baptismal bluff. And now he was claiming to have launched on the world a discovery beside which the invention of gunpowder, of the printing press, and of steam locomotion were inconsiderable trifles. Science had made bewildering strides in many directions during recent decades, but this thing seemed to belong to the domain of miracle rather than to scientific achievement. "And you really ask us to believe," Sir Wilfrid was saying, "that you've discovered a means of instructing animals in the art of human speech, and that dear old Tobermory has proved your first successful pupil?" "It is a problem of which I've worked for the last 17 years," said Mr. Appin, "but only during the last 8 or 9 months have I been rewarded with glimmerings of success. Of course, I've experimented with thousands of animals, but latterly only with cats, those wonderful creatures which have assimilated themselves so marvellously with our civilization while retaining all their highly developed feral instincts. Here and there among cats one comes across an outstanding superior intellect. I've lost my place. A standing superior intellect, just as one does among the ruck of human beings. And when I made the acquaintance of Tobermory a week ago, I saw at once that I was in contact with a beyond cat of extraordinary intelligence. I'd gone far along the road to success in recent experiments, but with Tobermory, as you call him, I've reached the goal." Mr. Appin concluded his remarkable statement in a voice which he strove to divest of a triumphant inflection. No one said rats, though Clovis's lips moved in a monosyllabic contortion which probably invoked those rodents of disbelief. "And do you mean to say," asked Miss Resker after a slight pause, "that you've taught Tobermory to say and understand easy sentences of one syllable?" "My dear Miss Resker," said the wonder worker patiently, "one teaches little children and savages and backward adults in this piecefield fashion. When one has once solved the problem of making a beginning with an animal of highly developed intelligence, one has no need for those halting methods. Tobermory can speak our language with perfect correctness." This time Clovis very distinctly said, "Beyond rats." Ah, the Nashes are back. I'll mute you there, don't worry. He said, "Beyond rats." Sir Wilfrid was more polite, but equally sceptical. "Well, hadn't we better get the cat in and judge for ourselves?" suggested Lady Blemley. Sir Wilfrid went in search of the animal, and the company settled themselves down to the languid expectation of witnessing some more or less adroit drawing-room ventriloquism. In a minute, Sir Wilfrid was back in the room, his face white beneath his tan and his eyes dilated with excitement. "By gad, it's true!" His agitation was unmistakably genuine, and his hearers started towards in a thrill of awkward interest. Collapsing into an armchair, he continued breathlessly, "Well, I found him dozing in the smoking room, and I called out to him to come for his tea, and he blinked at me in his usual way, and I said, 'Well, come on, Toby, don't keep us waiting.' And by gad, he drawled out in the most horribly natural voice that he'd come when he dashed well pleased. I nearly jumped out of my skin." Appin had preached to absolutely incredulous hearers, but Sir Wilfrid's statement carried instant conviction. A Babel-like chorus of startled exclamation arose, amid which the scientist sat mutely enjoying the first fruit of his stupendous discovery. In the midst of all this clamour, Tobermory entered the room and made his way with velvet tread and studied unconcern across the group seated round the tea table. A sudden hush of awkwardness and constraint fell on the company. Somehow there seemed an element of embarrassment in addressing on equal terms a domestic cat of acknowledged mental ability. Will you have some milk, Tobermory?" asked Lady Blemley in a rather strained voice. "Don't mind if I do," was the response, couched in a tone of even indifference. A shiver of suppressed excitement went through the listeners, and Lady Blemley might be excused for pouring out the saucerful of milk rather unsteadily. "I'm afraid I've spilt a good deal of it," she said apologetically. "That's all right, it's not my Axminster," said Toby's rejoinder. Another silence fell on the group, and then Miss Resker, in her best district visitor manner, asked if the human language had been difficult to learn. Tobermory looked squarely at her for a moment and then fixed his gaze serenely on the middle distance. It was obvious that boring questions lay outside his scheme of life. What do you think of human intelligence?" asked Mavis Pellington lamely. "Of whose intelligence in particular?" asked Tobermory coldly. Mine, for instance," said Mavis with a feeble laugh. "You put me in an embarrassing position," said Tobermory, whose tone and attitude certainly didn't suggest a shred of embarrassment. When your inclusion in this house party was suggested, Sir Wilfrid protested that you were the most brainless woman of his acquaintance, and that there was a wide distinction between hospitality and care for the feeble-minded. Lady Blemley replied that your lack of brain power was the precise quality that had earned you your invitation in the first place, as you were the only person she could think of who might be idiotic enough to buy their old car. You know, the one they call the envy of Sisyphus, because it goes uphill quite nicely if you push it. Lady Blemley's protestations would have had greater effect if she had not casually suggested to Mavis only that morning that the car in question would be just the thing for her down at her Devonshire estate. Major Barfield plunged in heavily to effect a diversion. "Well, what about you and your carryings on with that tortoiseshell puss up at the stables, eh?" The moment he said it, everyone realised the enormous blunder. "One does not usually discuss these matters in public," said Tobermory frigidly. "From a slight observation of your ways since you've been in the house, I should imagine you'd find it inconvenient if I were to shift the conversation onto your own little affairs." The panic which was ensued was not confined to the Major. "Ah, would you like to go and see if Cook's got your dinner ready?" suggested Lady Blemley hurriedly, affecting to ignore the fact that it wanted at least 2 hours to Tobermory's dinner time. "Thanks," said Tobermory, "but not quite so soon after my tea. I don't want to die of indigestion." "Well, cats have 9 lives, you know," said Sir Wilfrid heartily. "Very possibly," answered Tobermory, "but only one liver." "Adelaide," said Mrs. Cornish, "do you mean to encourage that cat to go out and gossip about us in the servants' hall?" The panic had indeed become general. A narrow ornamental balustrade ran in front of most of the bedroom windows at the towers, and it was recalled with dismay that this had formed a favourite promenade for Tobermory at all hours, whence he would watch the pigeons and heaven knew what else besides. If he intended to become reminiscent in his present outspoken strain, the effect could be something more than disconcerting. Mrs. Cornet, who spent much time for her toilet table and whose complexion was reputed to be of a nomadic though punctual disposition, looked as ill at ease as the Major. Mrs. Scrowan, who wrote fiercely sensual poetry and led a blameless life, merely displayed open irritation. If you're methodical and virtuous in private, you don't necessarily want everyone to know it. Bertie Van Tan, who was so depraved at 17 that he had long ago given up trying to be any worse, turned a dull shade of gardenia white, but he didn't commit the error of dashing out the room like Odo Finsbury, a young gentleman who was understood to be reading for the church, and was possibly disturbed at the thought of scandals he might hear concerning other people. Clovis had the presence of mind to maintain a composed exterior. Privately, he was calculating how long it would take him to procure a box of fancy mice through the agency of the Exchange of Mars as a species of hush money. Even in a delicate situation like the present, Agnes Resker could not endure to remain too long in the background. "Why did I ever come down here?" she asked dramatically. Tobermory immediately accepted the opening. "Judging by what you said to Mrs. Cornet on the croquet lawn yesterday, you were out for food. You described the Blemleys as the dullest people to stay with that you ever knew, and said they were clever enough to employ a first-rate cook, otherwise they find it difficult to get anyone to come down for a second time." "There's not a word in the truth. I appeal to Mrs. Cornet," exclaimed the discomfited Agnes. "And Mrs. Cornet repeated your remark afterwards to Bertie Van Tan," continued Tobermory, and he said that woman is a regular hunger march and she'd go anywhere for 4 square meals a day. Bertie Van Tan then said—" At this point, the chronicle mercifully ceased. Tobermory had caught a glimpse of the big yellow Tom from the rectory walking his way through the shrubbery towards the stable wing, and in a flash he'd vanished through the open French windows. With the disappearance of his too brilliant pupil, Cornelius Appin now suddenly found himself beset by a hurricane of bitter upbraiding, anxious inquiry, and frightened entreaty. The responsibility for the situation lay with him, and he must prevent matters from becoming worse. Could Tobermory impart his dangerous gift to other cats? Was the first question he had to answer. It was possible, he replied, that he might have initiated his intimate friend, the stable puss, into his new accomplishments, but it was unlikely that this teaching could have taken a wider range as yet. "Then," said Mrs. Cornet, "Tobermory may be a valuable cat and a great pet, but I'm sure you'll agree, Adelaide, that both he and the stable cat must be done away with without delay." "You don't suppose I've enjoyed the last quarter of an hour, do you?" said Lady Blemley bitterly. "My husband and I are very fond of Tobermory. At least we were before this horrible accomplishment was infused into him. And now, of course, the only thing is to have him destroyed as soon as possible." "Well, we can put some strychnine in the scraps he always gets at dinner time," said Sir Wilfrid, "and I'll go and drown the stable cat myself. Coachman will be very sore at losing his pet, but I'll say we've got a very catching form of mange has broken out in the cats, and we're afraid it might spread to the kennels." "But my great discovery," expostulated Mr. Appin, "after all my years of research and experiment." "You can go and experiment on the shorthorns on the farm who are under proper control," said Mrs. Cornett. "All the elephants at the zoological gardens. They're said to be highly intelligent, and they have this recommendation: they don't come creeping around our bedrooms, under chairs, and so forth." An archangel, ecstatically proclaiming the millennium, and then finding that it had clashed unpardonably with Henley, would have to be indefinitely postponed, could hardly have felt more crestfallen than Cornelius Appin at the reception of his wonderful achievement. Public opinion, however, was against him. In fact, had the general voice been consulted on the subject, it's probable that a strong minority vote would have been in favour of including him in the strychnine diet. Defective train arrangements and a nervous desire to see matters brought to a finish prevented an immediate dispersal of the party. But dinner that evening was not a social success. Sir Wilfrid had had a rather trying time with the stable cat and subsequently with the coachman. Agnes Resker ostentatiously limited her repast to a morsel of dry toast, which she bit as though it was a personal enemy, while Mavis Paddington maintained a vindictive silence throughout the meal. Lady Blemley kept up a flow of what she hoped was conversation, but her attention was fixed on the doorway. A plateful of carefully dosed fish scraps was in readiness on the sideboard, but sweets and savoury and dessert went their way, and no Tobermory appeared either in the dining room or the kitchen. The sepulchral dinner was cheerful compared with the subsequent vigil in the smoking room. Eating and drinking had at least supplied a distraction and a cloak to the prevailing embarrassment. Bridge was out of the question, in the general tension of nerves and tempers, and after Odo Finsbury had given a lugubrious rendering of Melisande in the Wood to a frigid audience, music was tacitly avoided too. At 11, the servants went to bed, announcing that the small window in the pantry had been left open as usual for Tobermory's private use. The guests read steadily through the current batch of magazines and fell back gradually to the badminton library and bound volumes of Punch. Lady Blemley made periodic visits to the pantry, returning each time with an expression of listless depression which forestalled any questioning. At 2 o'clock, Clovis broke the dominating silence. "Well, he won't turn up tonight. He's probably in the local newspaper office at the present moment, dictating the first instalment of his reminiscences. Lady What's-her-name's book won't be in it. It'll be the event of the day." Having made this contribution to the general cheerfulness, Clovis went to bed. At long intervals, the various members of the house party followed his example and drifted away. The servants taking round the early morning tea made a uniform announcement in reply to the uniform question. No, Tobermory had not returned. Breakfast was, if anything, a more unpleasant function than dinner had been, but before its conclusion the situation was relieved. Tobermory's corpse was brought in from the shrubbery, where a gardener had just discovered it. From the bites on his throat and the yellow fur which coated his claws, it was evident that he had fallen in unequal combat with the big Tom from the rectory. By midday, most of the guests had quitted the towers, and after lunch, Lady Blemley had sufficiently recovered her spirits to write an extremely nasty letter to the rectory about the loss of her wonderful, valuable pet. Tobermory had been Appin's one successful pupil, and he was destined to have no successor. A few weeks later, an elephant in the Dresden Zoological Garden, which had shown no previous signs of irritability, broke loose and killed an Englishman who had apparently been teasing it. The victim's name was variously reported in the papers as Oppin or Eppelin, but his front name was faithfully rendered Cornelius. If he was trying German irregular verbs on the poor beast, said Clovis, he deserved all he got. The end. Poor Tobermory! But again, it's a very typical example of Saki's work. You get this sort of upper class Edwardian ideals, but then he weaves in this sort of undercurrents of menace and humour as well, which is what I always like about his writing. Most of his stories are really good. As I say, I did Gabriel Ernest and Shredney Vashta last time. That's Tobermory. Another really good one to try if you ever find it. Mrs. Packletide's Tiger is an absolutely hilarious story about an old lady in India who wants to be, who her last dying wish is she wants to shoot a tiger. And I won't give away what happens, but it is very funny. But check him out if you like your short stories. Now we're going to finish this evening. I said I was going to do a Spike Milligan story, but I really struggled to find one I wanted to read. It seemed all I had was loads and loads of Spike Milligan poetry, and I didn't want to do that. I wanted a short story. So I decided to knock Spike on the head just for this evening, maybe do him another time. And instead I plumped for one of my absolute favourite authors of all time, a guy called Peter Tinniswood. Now, Peter Tinniswood is a northern writer, Yorkshire lad. You'll like him, Carol. And he famously wrote for lots of TV comedy series in the 60s, like That Was the Week That Was and The Frost Report and stuff like that. and he went on to write various novels about characters like Mog, and I'm trying to think of the other name. It's mostly all set up in Yorkshire. He also wrote the fairly long-running sitcom I Didn't Know You Cared, with Liz Smith in it and various other people. But my absolute favourite stuff he did was he wrote a whole series of books, TV series, radio series called Tales from a Long Room, which are ostensibly about cricket, but you don't have to be a cricket lover to like them and find them funny. And the central character in this is a wonderfully dotty old man called, just known as the Brigadier. We never find out what his surname is. He's called the Brigadier, and he lives in a Somerset village, wonderfully called Whitney Scrotum. And he recalls stories from his life. And because he's a bit old and a bit forgetful, he embellishes the stories as he goes along, and they get more and more wild and silly. And he keeps mucking up people's names, like he confuses different people. Like he's talking about the famous Pakistan cricketer and future, but now past president Imran Khan, and wonderfully describes him as being Imran Khan, the son of Sami Khan, who was a famous Jewish songwriter. So it's that sort of level of humour. And he unfortunately died in 2003. He was only 66 when he died, but he wrote some wonderful, wonderful stuff. So I'm going to read one of his short stories, one of his short chapters from one of his books. This is from the first of the Tales of the Long Room book, and it's basically him telling the story of how he met his wife. Now, again, in the series, it's never explained what her name is. She's just referred to as the lady wife. She sounds terrifying, as we'll hear from the write-up. And this is all about his time with the dear lady wife. So this is the Brigadier. I shall do it in his voice. I always imagine talking like this. So this is, I'll take my glasses off for this because the words are a bit small and I can't read them with my glasses on. So, The Lady Wife by Peter Tinniswood. The lady wife, like most members of her sex, which is female, has an inordinate number of birthdays. As she grows older...
It's not.
Oh, they're back. The Nashies are back again. I better mute them again. Done that. I'll start again. So, The Lady Wife. We're on Peter Tinniswood now, Nashies. You'll enjoy this. And this is a story called The Lady Wife. The lady wife, like most members of her sex, which is female, has an inordinate number of birthdays. And as she grows older, these undoubtedly increase in frequency. Indeed, I am now of the opinion that she is celebrating as many as one per annum. This year, I suppose she'll have a birthday on the Saturday of the Lord's Test. She usually does. And as always, when she informs me of the impending approach of this frightful event, I shall look at her and shall think to myself, why? Why on earth did I ever marry her? Certainly there was a physical attraction that I cannot deny. I remember to this day the surge of emotion that coursed through my veins when I first caught sight of her. The rose garden, and dear old Castle Arlott, slumbering with honey-laden bees, the gentle summer breeze lisping through the timid tracery of the delicate frindle tree, the benno bush aflame in scarlet bloom, and the phlox lacariensis, flowering hazily, lazily, benignly blue. And into my view she glided, a tall, slim, sylph-like figure in purest white. My heart missed a beat. The sap rose in my loins. Dear God, she was the spitting image of Herbert Sutcliffe. It was love at first sight. Call it an impetuosity of youth, if you will, but remember I had been out of the country for many years, serving my king and country in some of the remotest and most primitive outposts of his empire. I had not seen a first-class county cricketer for 7 years. I was desperate. I was bewitched. I was overwhelmed. We married that autumn in the exquisite little Saxon church at Whitney Scrotum, and as we walked down the aisle, arm in arm, embarking upon a career of conjugal concomitants, I felt for all the world as Percy Holmes must have felt, walking out to open the innings for Yorkshire at 6:05 on a grey, chill September evening at Trent Bridge, with Harold Larwood glowering and snarling in the gloom at the Radcliffe Road end. Our marriage, I am bound to say, has not been all gloom and misery. There have been moments of radiant happiness and unrestrained joy, when it seems that the earth has moved and the heavenly choirs have burst into anthems of passion, and in this soft afterglow, I've turned to my wife and said, "Right, it's your go now, but remember, you mustn't move your legs." She always was a duffer at French cricket. There have been moments, too, when the chores of nuptial incumbency have been enlightened by occasions of solemn levity. In this context, I recall with particular pleasure an afternoon at Cheltenham. My wife, as she approached her prime, grew to look more and more like the great Gloucestershire all-rounder T.W. Goddard. It was a source of much pride and satisfaction to me, none more so than on that sun-dappled post-prandial session of the Cheltenham Festival. We were sitting with friends, idly nibbling chilled zoobs and supping our chilled and chateau dipper, when peace and serenity was rudely disturbed when the Gloucestershire skipper, Mr. B.O. Allen, strode up to us angrily, pointed an accusatory finger at the lady wife, and said in a most hectoring tone, "Goddard, what in the name of blitheration are you doing sitting there dressed in women's togs? Get yourself off to the dressing room this instant." This the lady wife did, and at the end of the day she had the satisfaction of returning home, having taken 7 Leicestershire wickets for the cost of a mere 17 runs. But moments such as these have been rare indeed in our marriage. How many nights I've lain awake in bed, soft owls hooting, whiskers of rain snarling at the window pane, and I've raised myself on one arm and I've looked down on the slumbering form of the lady wife, and I've thought to myself, my God, I wish you were someone else. Admit it, dear friends, I'm not alone in these thoughts. How many of you, while engaged in the most intimate activity in which a man and wife can be involved, have closed your eyes and thought to yourself at the moment of delivery, by jingo, I wish you were the knowable patoddy. How many of you have not craved for the warm, passionate propinquity of a Fred Rumsey or the soft, whispered blandishments of a David Bairstow? Certainly with me, it's the physical side of things which have proved most irksome in my marriage. I'm convinced, for example, that those bi-monthly Friday night sessions with the lights out were the ultimate cause of a serious weakness in my spinning finger and an inability to achieve a consistent full length. Nothing will dissuade me from the view that had I not been married to the lady wife, I should have opened the innings for England, captained the gentlemen against the players, and in the fullness of time achieved the greatest honour any cricketer can attain to, being granted an audience with Mr. E.R. Ted Dexter. Friends tell me that circumstances might have been different had the lady wife and I had issue. Who can say? Was Joe Hardstaff Sr. a happier man for having produced Joe Hardstaff Jr.? What gave Mr. and Mrs. Gibbs more satisfaction, producing one of the finest off-spinners the world has ever known, or inventing toothpaste? Would it have been a consolation to Mr. Neville Chamberlain in the darkest days after Munich to know that one day his son Tosh would play outside left for Fulham? I think not. I'm reminded of a dear and precious friend of mine who produced a family of truly extravagant proportions. I met him in the long room at Lord's shortly after birth of yet another of his progeny. His mien was downcast, his face was bleak. "Well," I said, "what is it this time?" He looked at me silently for a moment, and then he muttered savagely, "Another bloody leg spinner." I'm bound to confess, in fairness, however, that in certain matters of a domestic nature, the lady wife has been of help to me. It was her handiwork with needle and thread which on many occasions have saved me from the distress of having to take a well-loved jockstrap to the vet to be put down. Her dexterity on the fretwork machine saved me from the considerable expense of replacing a sight screen, groundsman's hut, and portable ablutions facility destroyed under circumstances which even now I find too painful to recall. No, weighing up the pros and cons of our marriage in the balance, it is evident to me that but for the frequency of her birthdays, the lady wife might have become a reasonably tolerant companion. I will go further. It is not the birthdays per se which have caused me such discomfort. It's the necessity of purchasing presents that I found so damnable. No sooner has the wretched thing been handed over at the breakfast table than one is compelled to enter once more the nauseous and time-consuming palaver of thinking of a suitable gift for the next birthday. It wouldn't be so irksome if the lady wife were to show even a modicum of gratitude to my offering. But oh crumbs, not another one is her customary reaction. Why can't you think of something original for a change? Well, what she fails to appreciate is that the shop at Lord's does not have an inexhaustible supply of novelties. Dear God, she's already got 3 different versions of the Gubby Allen toilet bag, and I simply refuse to pay out good money for purchasing yet another Alec Bedser pyjama case. Stubbornly and steadfastly, the lady wife refuses to believe that the Ken Higgs autographed negligees and the gift-wrapped bottles of eau de Washbrook are invariably snapped up by the MCC committee members long before the shop opens for the summer season. How different it would be, it would all be if my wife were not to have birthdays. How different indeed it would be if no one were to have birthdays, if life were to become a timeless test, if we were to be spared the death and decay which comes to all from the relentless passing of the years. Would the world not be a better place today if Jack Hobbs was still wielding his silken willow? Our city streets still rang to the echoes of cart-horse hooves clopping on preening cobbles, and Mr. Stainless Stephen was still tickling our chuckle muscles on a faithful cat's whisker radio. Would not life be rich today if Spofforth and WG were still engaged in mortal combat, and the endless sunshine of the golden age lit up its radiance, the bleakness and despair of this age of Cold War, Nancy boys, and aluminium cricket bats? But no, dear friends, these are but the pipe dreams of an old man. Let us be happy with what we have. I look now with surprising affection on the lady wife as she sits in our oak-timbered drawing-room, her needles flashing in the flames of the log fire as she knits yet another set of cricket nets for Alf Gover's indoor cricket school. And I think to myself, grow old in your own time, my dear. Let the silver mingle with the gold. Let us give succour and comfort to each other as our innings draws inexorably to a close. But when you next have a birthday, for pity's sake, let it be on the second day of minor counties versus Indian tourists. The end, folks, the end. Well, folks, you survived all three stories. Oh, thank you, thank you. I can see your applause if not hear it. Very kind of you. Thank you, thank you. So there you go. So the three artists, Ray Bradbury, Saki, and Peter Tinniswood. Check them all out if you wish. Hope you enjoyed yourselves. If anyone's got any questions, you can unmute yourselves and ask me them now. No, good, right, I'm going.